My childhood memories are mostly happy ones, at least until I turned 12. That's when everything changed. I remember that morning like it was yesterday. My dad was packing his bags while Mom was crying in their bedroom. I stood in the doorway of my room, confused and scared, watching him walk down the stairs with 2 large suitcases. No explanation, no goodbye hug, nothing. Just the sound of the door closing and his car starting up in the driveway. I ran to the window and watched his silver Honda disappear down our street, thinking he'd turn around at any moment. But he didn't. I found Mom in the kitchen later that day, her eyes red and puffy from crying. "Why did Dad leave?" I asked, hoping she could help me make sense of it all. She slammed her coffee mug down so hard I jumped. "Because he's a selfish, terrible person, Sheila. He abandoned his own child and he won't even pay child support. That's the kind of man your father is." I didn't understand what child support meant back then, but the bitterness in Mom's voice scared me. I'd never seen her like this before. When I tried to ask more questions, she cut me off sharply. "Just forget about him. He doesn't deserve our tears." At first, I couldn't stop thinking about Dad. I'd lie awake at night, wondering if I'd done something wrong, if somehow this was my fault. I kept expecting him to call or show up at my school, but he never did. As weeks turned into months, the pain started to dull. Mom was right, he was a traitor who'd abandoned us. I threw myself into school and my hobbies, trying to be the perfect daughter for Mom. She seemed so broken after Dad left, and I wanted to make her happy. We developed new routines, just the 2 of us. We'd have pizza and movie nights on Fridays, and sometimes she'd let me help her in the garden on weekends. Things were different, but we were managing. Then, about 2 years after Dad left, Mom started dating again. That's when Steve entered our lives. He seemed nice enough at first, bringing Mom flowers, taking us both out to dinner, asking about my school. But looking back now, I should have seen the warning signs. "Your mom tells me you've been staying out late with your friends," he said one evening, about 3 months into their relationship. His tone was casual, but there was something in his eyes that made me uncomfortable. "Just until 6, I said. Mom said it was okay." He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Well, things are going to be a little different around here from now on. A 14-year-old girl needs structure." I remember looking at Mom, expecting her to say something, to stand up for me. But she just smiled adoringly at Steve and squeezed his hand. That's when I first felt it, that slight shift in the ground beneath my feet, like everything I knew was about to change again. My entire life changed after Mom and Steve got married. First, it was a strict curfew. I had to be home by 5 p.m. sharp, no exceptions. Then came the chore chart, detailing every single task I needed to complete each day. If I missed even one item, Steve would ground me. "But I have volleyball practice after school on Thursdays," I protested when he demanded I clean the entire kitchen by 6 p.m. every day. "Then you'll have to quit volleyball," Steve said flatly. "Your responsibilities at home come first." I looked to Mom for support, but she just nodded along. "Steve's right, honey. We need to teach you discipline, or you'll end up like your father." That became her go-to phrase whenever I complained, "or you'll end up like your father." It stung every time, making me feel guilty for even questioning Steve's rules. The rules kept piling up. I wasn't allowed to use my phone after 8 p.m. My homework had to be done at the kitchen table where Steve could monitor me. I needed permission to hang out with friends, which was rarely granted. Even my clothes became an issue. Steve insisted on approving my outfits before I left for school. One day, I came home 10 minutes late because my biology teacher wanted to discuss my project after class. Steve was waiting at the door, his face red with anger. "Where were you?" he demanded. "Mr. Peterson needed to talk about." "No excuses," he cut me off. "You're grounded for 2 weeks. Hand over your phone." "But that's not fair," I protested. "I was talking to a teacher." 3 weeks now," he said, holding out his hand. "Want to make it 4? Mom watched this whole exchange from the kitchen doorway, saying nothing. Later, when I tried to explain to her what happened, she just sighed. Steve is trying to teach you responsibility, Sheila. Something your father never did. Things got even more complicated when Mom announced she was pregnant. She was beaming with joy, and Steve couldn't stop grinning. I tried to be happy for them, but something in my gut told me things were about to get worse. My half-brother Tommy was born when I was 15 and a half. He was cute, I'll give him that, but his arrival turned my life upside down. Suddenly, I wasn't just responsible for my usual chores, I became an unpaid babysitter. You need to watch Tommy while we go out, Mom would say, already putting on her coat. But I have a history test tomorrow. Family comes first, Steve would interrupt. Besides, we're supporting you since your father doesn't send any money. The least you can do is help out. I watched them go on their dinner dates while I sat home with Tommy, trying to study with a crying baby. Steve bought Tommy designer clothes and expensive toys, while I was told we couldn't afford new school supplies. When Tommy cried at night, I was the one who had to get up and check on him, even on school nights. He's your brother, Mom would say when I complained about being exhausted. And since your father doesn't pay alimony, you need to contribute to this household somehow. By the time I turned 16, I was sick of hearing about how much of a financial burden I was. Every time Steve or Mom opened their mouths, it was about how much they had to spend on me. So I decided to do something about it. There was this small cafe near our house, the Morning Brew, that was always looking for help. I walked in one afternoon after school and talked to the manager, Sarah. She must have seen something in my eyes, because she hired me on the spot. The pay wasn't great, minimum wage, plus whatever tips I could get, but it was something. I worked from 4 to 8 p.m. on weekdays and longer shifts on weekends. The next 2 years were brutal. I'd wake up at 6 a.m. to take care of Tommy, go to school, work at the cafe, come home to more chores and Tommy duty, then try to squeeze in homework somewhere between everything else. My grades started slipping, there just weren't enough hours in the day. When graduation came around, I was devastated to learn I didn't have enough points for a scholarship. I remember sitting at our kitchen table, acceptance letter in hand, trying to explain to Mom and Steve about the tuition costs. Maybe we could figure something out together? I suggested hopefully. I could work more hours, and if you could help with just part of it. Steve laughed. Actually laughed. You should have thought about that before letting your grades drop. We don't have money for your college, Mom added, bouncing Tommy on her knee. If you'd studied harder instead of hanging out with your work friends all the time. I ended up taking an entry-level position at Wilson Trading Company. The hours were long, the work was mind-numbing, and my supervisor, Mr. Peters, seemed to take pleasure in pointing out every tiny mistake I made. But it was a real job with a real paycheck. Then came the bombshell. After my third paycheck, Steve called a family meeting. Now that you're working full-time, he said, it's time you started paying rent. I stared at him in disbelief. But I already give Mom money for groceries. That's for food, Mom jumped in. This would be for your room, utilities, everything else. They had it all calculated, a number that would eat up almost half my monthly salary. I wanted to argue, to point out how unfair it was, but what choice did I have? My salary wouldn't cover rent anywhere else in town, not with food and other expenses. The next 2 years felt like being trapped in quicksand. Every month, I handed over a chunk of my salary, watching Steve and Mom spend money on Tommy's private swimming lessons and expensive toys, while I wore the same clothes I'd had since high school. But I kept my head down and worked hard. Mr. Peters eventually noticed, and when a supervisor position opened up, he recommended me for it. The raise that came with the promotion wasn't huge, but it was enough. Enough to finally get out. I found a small one-bedroom apartment across town. It wasn't much, the paint was peeling and the neighbors were loud, but it was mine. The day I moved out, Mom barely looked up from helping Tommy with his homework. Make sure you leave your key, was all she said. Living on my own wasn't easy. The apartment was small and needed repairs I couldn't afford, but at least it was mine. I kept working at Wilson Trading, taking every overtime shift I could get. Still, after rent, utilities, and basic necessities, there was barely anything left to save. I'd watch my coworkers with college degrees moving up the corporate ladder while I stayed stuck in the same position. My boss had even told me directly, "Sheila, you're one of our best workers, but without a degree, there's only so far you can go here." College remained this distant dream. I'd sometimes browse university websites during my lunch break, calculating tuition costs and always coming up short. Every scholarship I found required either better high school grades than I had or full-time student status, which I couldn't afford. Mom and Steve rarely called. When they did, it was usually Mom asking if I was coming to Tommy's school events or soccer games. I usually made up excuses. I couldn't bear watching Steve beam with pride while my mother fawned over her perfect son. Then came that night, just after my 22nd birthday. I was heating up leftover Chinese food when someone knocked on my door. When I looked through the peephole, my heart stopped. There he was, my father, looking 10 years older than he should. "Sheila?" His voice was exactly as I remembered it. "Please, can we talk?" My first instinct was to slam the door in his face. How dare he show up after 10 years? But something in his appearance made me pause. He looked sick, almost frail. "5 minutes," I said, keeping the door chain on. "That's all I ask," he replied, and something in his voice made me remove the chain. He sat at my small kitchen table, his hands shaking slightly as he declined my automatic offer of coffee. Up close, he looked even worse, pale and thin, nothing like the strong, competent man from my childhood memories. "I need to tell you why I left," he began, his voice barely above a whisper. "I'm not your biological father." The words hit me like a physical blow. I sat down hard in the chair opposite him. "What?" "I had suspicions," he continued, his voice steady now. "Your mother had been acting strange, protective of her phone. I found messages. I did a DNA test. When I confronted her, she confessed to having an affair." My head was spinning. I gripped the edge of the table to steady myself. "She begged me to forgive her," he went on. "But I couldn't stay. Every time I looked at you, I saw her betrayal. It wasn't fair to you, you were innocent in all this, but I couldn't handle it. But I always paid the alimony. I couldn't be there for you, but I made sure you were taken care of financially." "What do you mean you paid alimony?" I asked, my voice shaking. "Mom always said you never sent a penny. She and Steve kept telling me I had to help with Tommy and pay rent because you weren't supporting me." Dad, or I guess not really my dad, reached into his jacket and pulled out a thick envelope. Inside were bank statements, years of them, showing monthly transfers to my mother's account. $2,000 every month, without fail, he said quietly. I set up automatic payments the day I left. I stared at the papers, my hands trembling. Each statement showed the same thing, regular monthly payments, all clearly labeled child support, Sheila. Years of them. Tens of thousands of dollars that I'd never seen a cent of. I felt sick. All those years of being told I was a burden, of working at the cafe while trying to study, of paying rent to my own mother while she had been receiving money meant for me every single month. "Why are you here now?" I asked, pushing the statements away. "After all this time?" He shifted uncomfortably in his chair, suddenly looking even more frail. "I have some news, Sheila. 2 pieces, actually. First, I can't have children. Secondly, I'm dying, Sheila. Cancer. Doctors give me 2 years, at most." I sat there, stunned. This man who I'd spent years hating, who I'd blamed for everything wrong in my life, was sitting at my kitchen table telling me he was dying. "After I left, I threw myself into work," he continued. "Made some smart investments. I've done well for myself, very well. But I have no family, no children of my own. And despite everything, despite not being your biological father, I've never stopped thinking of you as my daughter. What are you saying? I want to make you my heir, Sheila. Everything I have, the house, the investment properties, my savings, I want it all to go to you. The room started spinning. I gripped the edge of the table, trying to process what he was saying. This man, who I'd thought abandoned me, had been supporting me all along. And now he was dying and wanted to leave me his fortune? I need time to think about this, I managed to say. He nodded and stood up slowly. Of course, here's my card. Call me when you're ready to talk. I walked him to the door in a daze. Before he left, he turned to me one last time. For what it's worth, Sheila, I'm sorry. Not for leaving your mother, she made her choices. But I'm sorry for leaving you. I should have found a way to tell you the truth. I barely slept that night. By morning, I knew what I had to do. I drove to Mom and Steve's house, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tight, my knuckles turned white. Tommy was at school, and Steve's car wasn't in the driveway. Perfect. Mom answered the door in her gardening clothes, looking surprised to see me. Sheila, what are you doing here? We need to talk, I said, walking past her into the house. The living room looked exactly the same, Tommy's toys everywhere, his school photos dominating the walls. Dad came to see me yesterday. Mom froze halfway to the couch. What? Yeah, interesting conversation. He wants to make me his heir. Apparently, he's done pretty well for himself. He what? Mom's face turned red. After abandoning you? After refusing to pay a cent in child support? And you're just going to forgive him because he's got money now? I couldn't help it, I started laughing. A harsh, bitter laugh that made Mom take a step back. That's funny, Mom. Really funny. Because he showed me his bank statements. Every single month for 6 years, $2,000 in child support payments. Where did all that money go, Mom? Because it sure didn't go to me. The color drained from her face. Sheila, And that's not even the best part, I continued, pulling the bank statements from my bag. He also told me why he really left. About the DNA test. About your affair. Mom sank onto the couch, her hands shaking. You don't understand. Oh, I understand perfectly. You cheated on him, got pregnant with me, and then lied about it for years. Then when he found out and left, you lied some more. You took his money meant for me, and used it for yourself and your new family. I needed that money, Mom suddenly burst out. Do you know how hard it was being a single mother? And then when Tommy came along. Don't you dare try to justify this, I shouted. You made me work through high school. You made me pay rent. You watched me struggle to save for college, while you had thousands of dollars of my money sitting in your account. Mom's shock transformed into anger. I raised you. I took care of you. And now you're going to side with him because he's dangling his money in front of you. Side with him? He might not be my biological father, but at least he was honest with me. Which is more than I can say for you. She stood up, her face hard. If you accept his money, we're done. Do you understand me? You'll no longer be welcome in this family. I looked around the room, at Tommy's toys, at the family photos that I wasn't in, at this house where I'd never felt at home. That's rich, Mom. Really rich. You made it clear years ago that I wasn't part of this family. The only difference now is that I finally understand why. I walked out of the house, letting the door slam behind me. Mom didn't try to stop me. I was at work when my phone started blowing up with notifications. Aunt Carol had texted, "Have you seen your mother's Facebook post?" I waited until my lunch break to look. There it was, a long paragraph about her ungrateful daughter who had abandoned her loving family for a deadbeat dad's money. Mom had really outdone herself with the drama, painting herself as the sacrificing single mother and me as the greedy, heartless child. The comments were even worse. I can't believe Sheila would do this to you. After everything you've done for her. She always was a difficult child. Money changes people. My relatives, people who hadn't bothered to contact me in years, were suddenly experts on my life. My hand shook as I started typing my response. Since Mom wants to air our family drama on Facebook, let's tell the whole story. Let's talk about how she cheated on Dad and lied about me being his daughter. Let's talk about the DNA test that made him leave. And while we're at it, let's talk about the $2,000 monthly child support payments he made for 6 years, money I never saw a cent of. I have the bank statements to prove it. Where did all that money go, Mom? I attached photos of the bank statements, making sure to blur out the account numbers, but leaving the payment amounts clear. The response was immediate. The same relatives who'd been condemning me minutes earlier were now flooding Mom's post with questions. Is this true? Sarah, what's going on? $2,000 a month for 6 years? That's $144,000. Mom deleted her post within hours. My phone kept ringing with calls from relatives, but I ignored them all. Instead, I pulled out Dad's business card and dialed his number. We met for dinner that weekend. It was awkward at first. 10 years is a long time, but somehow felt right. He told me stories about his business ventures, and I told him about my job. When I mentioned my dream of going to college, his eyes lit up. Let me help, he said. It's the least I can do after all these years. 2 weeks later, I was enrolled in evening management classes at the local university. For the first time, I felt like my life was moving forward instead of standing still. Dad and I started having weekly dinners. Sometimes we talked about the past, about what really happened. Other times we just talked about normal things, work, school, movies. He wasn't my biological father, but he was becoming something just as important, a real parent. Mom tried calling a few times after I exposed her lies, but I let it go to voicemail. Steve sent a text about tearing the family apart. I blocked his number. Tommy asked me at the grocery store why I didn't come to his games anymore. That one hurt, but I just wasn't ready to deal with any of them. Those 4 years with Dad were a gift I never expected to have. The doctors had given him 2 years at most, but he was always stubborn. I'm not going anywhere until I see you graduate, he'd say, and somehow he made it happen. We made the most of our time together. Between my evening classes and his treatments, we'd meet for dinner at least twice a week. He told me stories about his life, his business ventures, and even shared old photos from when I was little. Sometimes we'd just sit in comfortable silence, watching old movies or sharing a pizza. You know, he said one evening, about a year after we reconnected, I spent 10 years regretting leaving you. Even after I found out you weren't biologically mine, I never stopped loving you as my daughter. I remember squeezing his hand, unable to speak through the tears. He came to all my college presentations, sat proudly in the front row even when he was too weak to stand for long. During his better days, he taught me about business, about investing, about all the things he'd learned building his fortune. The last few months were hard. The cancer had spread, and he spent more time in the hospital than out. I took time off work to be there with him, studying for my finals in the uncomfortable hospital chair beside his bed. You don't have to stay, he'd say. Try and make me leave, I'd answer. He was there for my graduation, though he had to watch via video call from his hospital room. I brought my diploma to him right after the ceremony, still wearing my cap and gown. His smile was weak, but his eyes were bright with pride. I always knew you could do it, he whispered. 2 weeks later, he was gone. I was holding his hand when he took his last breath, telling him about my new job offer and how I was going to use everything he'd taught me. The inheritance was substantial, a beautiful house in the suburbs, 2 downtown apartments, and enough money to never work again if I chose not to. But more valuable than any of that were the lessons he'd taught me, the love he'd shown me, and the truth he'd given me. I moved into one of the apartments, rented out the other one and the house. The rental income more than covers my expenses, but I kept my job anyway. Dad taught me the value of building something for myself. Some of my relatives still try to play peacemaker, suggesting family reunions or holiday gatherings with Mom, Steve, and Tommy. I always decline politely. I've made my peace with the past. I tell them when we meet for holiday dinners, carefully scheduled when I know mom won't be there. But that doesn't mean I need to revisit it. They understand, or at least they've stopped arguing. Aunt Carol even apologized for believing mom's Facebook post without hearing my side. Uncle Jim admitted he'd had suspicions about the child support money for years, but never said anything. Sometimes I drive past my old house and see Tommy playing in the yard, taller now, looking more like Steve every day. Mom still lives there with her perfect little family, posting perfect family photos on Facebook. I don't feel angry anymore when I see them. I don't feel much of anything, really. Dad taught me that family isn't about blood, it's about love, truth, and choosing to be there for someone even when it's hard. He chose to be my father twice, first when he married mom, and again when he came back into my life. That means more to me than any biological connection ever could.
I lost my mother to illness when I was in elementary school. My father worked hard to raise me, and I loved him dearly for his gentle nature. When I married my husband Ethan, my father shed tears and said, "Please take good care of Lily." My only concern was Ethan's parents. Both my father-in-law and mother-in-law graduated from prestigious private universities. They were true elites. My father-in-law had established his own company when he was young and made a fortune in one generation. However, not long after we married, the company went bankrupt because my mother-in-law, who was registered as an executive, spent too much of the company's money. Desperate, my in-laws suggested moving in together. "Clearly, we're going to have children, and we can't afford to support you," Ethan argued. Listening to my husband's words, I sighed with relief. Unless there was a need for caregiving, I wanted to avoid living with my in-laws. It seemed my husband felt the same. Then my father-in-law yelled, "Are you repaying the kindness of raising you with ingratitude?" My mother-in-law began to cry. "This is what happens when you marry a woman from a poor family. You've become rotten to the core." The conversation got nowhere. It was really impossible to live together, but maybe we could send some money. My husband suggested this, and although I glared at him, paying money meant we wouldn't have to live together. I chose the option that would lighten my mental burden, persuaded by my husband. However, this was the beginning of our troubles. The agreement was to provide $300 a month, but they kept asking for additional money every month, saying we can't pay for medical bills and medicine. Or my back hurts, so I need to go to a chiropractor. I doubted whether this was true, but I didn't feel like checking. If we refused, they might bring up living together again. I grappled with frustration, but endured the constant begging for money. Our finances were barely making ends meet every month. That's why I started working part-time at a bar, leaving my young son Noah at the child care center. The bar paid well, and they let me take home leftover food. Somehow, we managed to stabilize our finances. When Noah turned 10, my husband was ordered to transfer by his company. Since the transfer was to a rural area, Noah and I considered moving with him. But my husband said, "It's better to be near your father," thinking of my father who lived alone. My father's house was about 20 minutes away by train, while the transfer location required the use of a bullet train. I decided to rely on my husband's words. While I worked at the bar, my father would take care of Noah. He seemed happy to spend time with his grandson. I would take home food from the bar, and my father, Noah, and I would gather around the dining table. Noah, who never warmed up to his paternal grandparents, was unreservedly affectionate with my father. My humble, grandson-loving father was the complete opposite of my in-laws. They would brazenly claim to be my parents, eat and drink as they pleased at the bar where I worked, and leave without paying. I ended up covering all their bills. Although they didn't come often, when they did, it was usually to show off to friends or juniors. Even though it was only once or twice a month, it still hurt to pay for them out of my part-time earnings. The manager often sent something and gave me substantial discounts, saying, "You're always working hard." I sometimes fantasize about splashing beer on them, imagining how satisfying that would feel. In the fall of Noah's junior year in high school, as he was preparing for university entrance exams, I received a call from my husband. "I can come home in the spring." "Really?" "Yeah, and with a promotion to boot. I really put you through a lot. Let's live happily together again, the three of us." Next spring was looking busy. As soon as I hung up, the electronic sound of an incoming call rang out. Thinking it was my husband, I answered without looking. What? I inadvertently let out a careless, deflated voice. Hello, this is the city hospital, the caller explained in a tense voice. My father had collapsed and was taken to the hospital. He had stopped to buy Noah's favorite pudding at a convenience store and fainted in front of the cashier. I grabbed only my wallet and phone and rushed to the hospital. Although I couldn't get many details, I was told my father was in emergency surgery. Dad, I called out to him, praying, please make it, please. When I arrived at the hospital, I gave the reception staff my father's name. I heard he's in surgery now. I pressed the staff at the front desk, drenched in sweat. Please head to the 4th floor. I was directed to the operating room. The surgery wasn't over yet, so I sat on the bench, praying and waiting. Several hours later, the doctor informed me the surgery was done. The diagnosis was a stroke. There would be a slight impairment in speech and motor functions, but I was nothing but grateful that his life was spared. Dad's condition gradually stabilized. During my free time, I visited the hospital, talking to Dad and even giving his immobile hand a massage. Dad, today Noah. I made sure to tell Dad all about Noah. His initial response was weak, but daily rehab was fruitful, and Dad started to show signs of recovery. One day, while massaging his hand as usual, Dad weakly grasped my hand. It was the first response since the surgery, and I was so happy that I cried. Dad, you did great. Then Dad slowly shook his head and pointed at me with a hand he could move. Thank you, he stuttered, smiling. He should have had difficulty moving his facial muscles, yet he smiled at me. Stroke aside, Dad seemed to have aged, becoming smaller. I recalled my father at my wedding, firmly shaking hands with my husband and saying, take good care of Lily. His strong, dependable hand had now become frail. Though it was my turn to protect him, I firmly grasped my thin father's hand, encouraging myself. I had to leave the hospital before evening because I had a part-time job at the bar. I hoped Dad continued to recover as I started my shift, full of hope. My in-laws were the first to enter when the shop opened. Lily dear, they called cheerfully, bringing along 2 men a bit older than themselves. I didn't care how they were related and didn't want to know. Following the restaurant's protocol, I led them to their seats. As soon as you sit, order as much as you like, said my father-in-law. Don't worry about the bill, added my mother-in-law, as if they wouldn't just push it onto me again. I focused on serving them, hiding my annoyance. I had just received good news about Dad, after all. The peaceful events at the hospital were ruined by the in-laws in front of me. They knew no bounds, ordering beer, soju, and sake one after another. The table was a mess with spilled drinks and food scraps. The 2 men they'd brought seemed drunk and started harassing me. Hey, wife, bring the beer quickly. What a shame, our daughter-in-law here, really such an incapable wife. My in-laws began to loudly criticize me on purpose. I tried to hold back since I was at work, but my heart couldn't contain it. Excuse me, customers, there are others here. Can you please quiet down a bit? I attempted a desperate counterattack, hoping that by speaking loudly enough for other customers to hear, it would embarrass my in-laws. It's just a party, who cares? That's what they mean by you can tell where someone's from. Look, your plate's open, ma'am. Fueled by alcohol, the remarks escalated. It seemed she was raised so carelessly because she has no mother. I was so entangled by my mother-in-law's words that I couldn't respond. I was already holding back at the edge of my limits from having my son Noah insulted, but now they were even mentioning my late mother. I've always wanted to splash beer on them, imagining defeating my in-laws like this had become part of my daily routine. That day, I was virtually pouring a bottle of flat beer over their heads in my imagination, of course. In January, Noah was accepted into his first-choice private university. On the day of the acceptance announcement, my husband also called with the happy news that he could come home the day before Noah's graduation ceremony. We would both be attending Noah's graduation. The night of the graduation, we had planned to celebrate Noah's success and my husband's promotion at the bar where I worked, but that meant we couldn't avoid inviting my in-laws. My father was still in the hospital, so he couldn't come, but ignoring my in-laws would cause problems later. I prayed they would be busy, but if they knew we were treating them, they would definitely come. They were such despicable people. When I called to invite them, Sure enough, both agreed to come. Noah's new private university is known nationwide as a prestigious institution, and my father-in-law pompously said, he inherited my genes. Well, see you on that day. I quickly ended the call. The night of Noah's graduation, I happily walked to the restaurant with my husband and Noah, the three of us together after a long time. The in-laws had already arrived by taxi. The restaurant manager had kindly prepared a private room for our celebration. Just thinking about my in-laws made my stomach ache, but I decided to smile as much as possible in front of the family and entered the restaurant. We took our seats and toasted with bottled beer for the adults and juice for Noah. Noah, congratulations, my husband smiled warmly at him. Congratulations on your promotion, I said to my husband, raising my glass. I'm really looking forward to college in the spring, Noah exclaimed. Here, this is from Grandpa. I handed Noah a cherry-colored envelope. Grandpa, of course, referred to my father. From Grandpa? Noah joyfully accepted the envelope. It's not much, but he said to enjoy college life. Grandpa prepared this celebration gift with a nurse's help. Even though his hands still aren't moving properly, I explained. Just knowing my father's feelings was enough. I had informed my in-laws over the phone that my father had a stroke and was hospitalized. They were out playing and responded only with a casual, "Oh, really?" Watching them, it suddenly hit me how indifferent they were. Speaking of which, it's really tough, huh? A stroke, my father-in-law said nonchalantly. I was used to it by now, so I brushed it off. Yes, it is, but the progress is good. My father-in-law didn't seem to like my indifferent attitude and mocked my Colette's father. It's a brain disease, right? His head's gone crazy, hasn't it? Noah's brow furrowed as he looked at his grandfather. Quick to counter, my husband spoke up. Is that any way to talk? But it's the truth, isn't it? Yes, it's a brain disease, right? The in-laws were not at all shaken by their son's argument. The boastful in-laws couldn't help but enjoy the misfortune of others. Just stop it, my husband began to say, but I held up my hand to his face. Then I splashed the lukewarm beer that was left in the glass right onto my father-in-law. The flat beer left in the bottle was poured over my mother-in-law. I could endure them speaking ill of me if it didn't reach Noah's ears. But I couldn't stand to hear them say that my father, who had raised me with all his might, was crazy. My father's hand had become so small. It was up to me to protect that hand. I glared at my in-laws. Don't mock my father. The in-laws were at a loss for words, having beer suddenly thrown on them. It was just a joke. Come on, father-in-law retorted in a low voice. My husband then countered, Dad, Mom. They slowly looked up at their son's voice. There's a reason why I invited you here today. My husband pulled out a single note from his wallet. He placed it where the in-laws could see it, like a slap in the face. On it was a detailed list of the in-laws' extravagant spending, a bus tour with friends, luxury spa treatments, purchasing designer bags, and much more. You can find out about this stuff easily, he said. The in-laws no longer tried to make eye contact. Everything my husband had found seemed to be true. If you can afford to live so luxuriously, you don't need our support anymore. I quickly followed up, cutting off my father's indecisive words. You don't need it, right? But just the allowance, mother-in-law pleaded. No, we won't send any more money. We're cutting ties too, my husband stated firmly. Please go home. My disheveled and soaked in-laws looked at me with stunned expressions. Please leave, I repeated, pointing to the exit. Under the pressure of my firm stance, my in-laws slithered out as if crawling on the floor. It seemed my husband knew everything. He knew the torment I was going through. Apparently, Noah would sometimes stop by the bar to say thanks for the meals, but embarrassed to be seen by me, he waited until I wasn't there. At that time, the manager had been reporting to Noah how I was being treated by my in-laws. It's hard to tell a child this, but please protect your mom, he was told. Noah had discussed this with my husband. My husband had declared that when he returned, he would sever ties and stop all financial support. However, he had asserted that it would only be carried out once he was back, since he couldn't protect Noah or me when he was away. And so my husband stopped the payments as promised. Every day, my in-laws called, probably to demand the money before cutting ties completely. I unleashed everything I wanted to say to my in-laws. There was nothing to fear since I was ending this relationship. After ending the call unilaterally, I blocked my in-laws' contact. A few days later, my in-laws seemed to have asked my part-time jobs manager to help them get in touch with me. They did this multiple times during business hours. The manager, annoyed, lost his temper. "Don't ever come back to our store," he yelled, throwing an empty beer bottle and chasing them out. In the conversation between my in-laws at that time, I heard words like payments and monthly installments, so it seems they were likely taking cash advances or making installment payments, unable to lower their standard of living. Serve them right. I'm now working at the second bar opened by the manager. He made arrangements to ensure that my in-laws couldn't harm me if they came to the store. My father will be discharged from the hospital soon, and it's decided that we'll live together in this house. My husband and Noah both fully agreed. As I cleaned the room that will be dedicated to my father, I thought back to his small hands. That day, I must have been utterly exhausted. After putting my daughter Nia to bed in her crib, I headed to my bedroom and fell asleep instantly. A few hours later, I was abruptly woken by Nicholas crying in the night. Still half asleep, I checked the time on my phone. 1:00 a.m. Good thing I got a little nap earlier, I thought, dragging my tired body up, planning to go to the living room to soothe Nia. Just then, I heard a shouting voice, "Shut up, be quiet." For a moment, I couldn't tell where the voice was coming from. I thought maybe my mother-in-law Jamie was yelling from her room, so I said, "Yes, I'm coming to soothe her now," and opened the living room door. There, right in front of me, was Jamie, standing over the crib, glaring at Nia. The next moment, she slapped Nia's face, shouting, "Enough already." "What are you doing?" I yelled louder than I ever had before. Jamie looked surprised for a second, then yelled back, "Why didn't you soothe her sooner? This child is so noisy." Panicking, I rushed over to the crib and lifted Nia to protect her from Jamie. I couldn't believe it, hitting a baby. My name is Candice, a 28-year-old housewife. I used to be an office worker, but I'm currently on maternity leave, focusing on housework and childcare. My husband Miles and I started living with Jamie, my mother-in-law, about a year ago. Miles's job is demanding, and he's rarely home. He was worried about leaving me alone while I was pregnant and felt sorry for Jamie being alone since my father-in-law Willis passed away 2 years ago, so we decided to move in with her. At first, living together went well, but gradually Jamie started showing her true colors, and honestly, I was having a hard time. "Candy, you're really slow at housework, aren't you? Can't you make better food?" Jamie harassed me every chance she got. When Willis was still alive, I didn't have any issues when visiting my in-laws' house, so I didn't particularly dislike Jamie back then. However, after Willis passed away and we started living together, Jamie became an unbearably selfish and rude presence in my life. "Hurry up with the housework. You're really useless, you know. Slow and ugly." Jamie kept insulting me like this. The last part was just mean and had nothing to do with housework. Since I was pregnant, it was natural for me to be slow with chores. But Jamie didn't seem to care. She just seemed desperate to harass me. As for Miles, he's mostly away on business trips and doesn't get home until midnight, even when he's not traveling, so I have to spend most of my days with Jamie. I kept hoping that things would change since the baby was born. Even Jamie, rough as she is, would surely become kinder and gentler living with her grandchild. I was desperately holding on to that hope. I did consult Miles about it on WhatsApp, keeping it to a level that wouldn't trouble his work, and he replied with, "I'm really sorry. I wish I could be there for you during tough times." He also takes care to admonish Jamie when they meet. Knowing that Miles is on my side gives me a little relief. That's why I could bear being scolded by Jamie for not doing the housework well enough while pregnant. Later, I safely gave birth to a healthy baby girl. Miles, blessed him, managed to get permission from his company, saying the baby is being born, and left work early, rushing to the hospital just before I gave birth. When he held our newborn daughter, he looked so happy and said, "She's really cute, like an angel." I was happy too, having given birth to the child of the man I love. I reported the birth of our healthy baby girl to Jamie through WhatsApp. Since we lived together, I thought she might come to visit us in the hospital, but Jamie didn't show up. She didn't even reply on WhatsApp. Could it be that she's not interested in her granddaughter? I started to feel a cold sweat. Will this harassment continue even now? As I was dreading that thought, the door to my hospital room opened. "Candice, how are you feeling?" Wow, what a cute baby. It's a girl, right? She's going to be beautiful. It was my sister-in-law, Leela, who came to visit. Leela is very kind and cheerful, and she's always been good to me. I've always loved Leela. She's already married and has children, so I had decided to consult her about parenting. What's her name? Miles, and I decided to name her Nia. Oh, that's a nice name. Wait, hasn't Mom come? No, I did contact her, but she ignored the read receipt. Oh, I see. She's really a pain sometimes, isn't she? Unpredictable and lacking common sense. Well, yeah. Leela is straightforward, and I've always appreciated that about her. She once told me, if you ever have a problem living with Mom, feel free to vent to me. That really saved me, so I used to honestly complain to Leela when things got really tough. Leela understood Jamie's difficult nature, so she knew that if she scolded Jamie based on what I told her, Jamie would end up taking it out on me. That's why she wouldn't admonish Jamie unless it was really necessary. At that time, just being able to vent was enough to relieve my stress. I had no idea things would get harder after Nia was born. When I got discharged from the hospital and returned home with Nia, Jamie didn't mention her at all. Hurry up and clean, she said. I couldn't believe it. It was as if she completely ignored Nia's existence. Despite feeling upset, I put Nia in her crib and started cleaning. About 5 minutes later, Jamie started yelling, "Candy, come here." Yes, what is it? That baby is noisy. Do something about her crying. I'm sorry. Again, I couldn't believe it. Referring to her as that baby as if she's a nuisance and telling me to do something about her crying. Jamie continued to treat Nia poorly. The baby is crying. It stinks. Change her diaper now. The crib is in the way. Shut up, baby. Jamie shouted these things each time, and Nia would cry louder in fright, which made Jamie even angrier. It was a very uncomfortable atmosphere for Nia and me. Jamie, her name is Nia. Can you please call her by her name? Shut up. Don't tell me what to do. You're her mother, so it's your job to take care of her. Make sure I'm comfortable. Look, she's crying again. Nicola had started crying because Jamie yelled. I had just put her to bed. I had to stop my chores and go soothe Nicola, and if that delayed the housework, Jamie would get mad about that too. When I put Nicola back to bed and resumed my chores, Jamie said, this is really in the way, takes up so much space, and kicked the crib. The crib shook, and Nicola woke up crying again. What are you doing, Jamie? Shut up. It's your fault for putting such a big thing here. But it was you who told us to put the bed in the living room because it's noisy when she cries at night in our room. Are you complaining to me now? Stop arguing and soothe that noisy child. That noisy child, this person is really the worst. I had no choice but to do my chores while holding Nicola. Trying to balance housework and childcare without angering Jamie was really tough, and I was gradually getting exhausted. If I focused too much on childcare, I'd be scolded for being slow at housework. If I focused on chores, I'd be berated for parenting. Miles was away on a business trip for about 2 months and wasn't home. I couldn't bear it and tried consulting him over WhatsApp and phone, but he seemed busy and couldn't talk long. He'd apologized many times saying, I'm really sorry for the hard times. But I felt guilty making him apologize when he was working so hard for our family. Then something unbelievable happened. That day, maybe because I was so tired, I fell asleep as soon as I put Nicola in her crib and went to my bedroom. A few hours must have passed when I suddenly woke up to Nicola crying in the night. Still half asleep, I checked the time on my mobile phone. 1:00 a.m. Good thing I got a little nap earlier, I thought, dragging my tired body up, planning to go to the living room to soothe Nicola. Just then, I heard a shouting voice, Shut up! Be quiet! For a moment, I couldn't tell where the voice was coming from. I thought maybe Jamie was yelling from her room, so I said, Yes, I'm coming to soothe her now, and opened the living room door. There, right in front of me, was Jamie standing over the crib, glaring at Nicola. The next moment, she slapped Nicola's face, shouting, Enough already. What are you doing? I yelled louder than I ever had before. Jamie looked surprised for a second, then yelled back, Why didn't you soothe her sooner? She's so noisy, this child. Panicking, I rushed over to the crib and lifted Nicola to protect her from Jamie. I couldn't believe it, hitting a baby. Could this person really be human, hitting a 3-month-old baby? Nicola was crying louder than I had ever heard before. and her face had turned red. I immediately called an ambulance. At the hospital, the doctor examined Nicola. He said her face was red, but there was no worry about bruises or injuries, which relieved me. I almost collapsed on the spot. What happened? Did you drop her on the floor or something? The doctor asked. I explained the situation to the doctor. Right then, Leela entered the room. Candy, is Nicola okay? Oh, Leela. In my panic, I had called her. While in the ambulance, I called Leela despite it being the middle of the night since Miles was on a business trip and couldn't come immediately. Leela explained to the doctor about Jamie hitting Nicola. The doctor was speechless and Leela was shaking with anger. The next day, I went home with Leela. I let her enter the house alone to confront Jamie. Jamie acted as if nothing had happened, harassing me as usual. You're late. Hurry up and make breakfast. You missed taking out the trash because you came home in the morning. You really can't do housework. Enough already. Did you forget what happened yesterday? You had a 3-month-old baby, remember? How can you act subnormally? First, apologize for yesterday. Jamie's face turned red with anger. What? Why should I apologize? That child was the noisy one. I just slapped her because she wouldn't listen. It's a part of discipline. I thought she wouldn't be quiet otherwise. That's not discipline. It's just violence. Enough, so noisy. Just do your chores already. Jamie, you don't regret it at all, do you? You don't even think you did anything wrong. Leela, please come in. Leela entered the living room as I called her. Why is Leela here? Mom, what are you doing? I can't believe you did such a thing. No, Jamie was flustered by Leela's arrival. Mom, you do realize that what you did is legally punishable, right? Jamie's face turned pale. Leela, you're not going to sue your own mother, are you? The one who's going to sue is Candice. I'll just be her lawyer. But wait, it was just a part of her education. Who would agree that hitting a baby is education? This is a case of assault. No matter how much Jamie tried to justify her actions, they could never be excused. I'll definitely sue you. Be prepared, I told Jamie. Jamie began to cry quietly. I'm sorry, Candy. I always lose control when I get angry and end up regretting it later. I've always been depressed and regretful about how I treated you and Nia. I truly am sorry for what happened. Why did I raise my hand to her? I always wanted a boy for the eldest grandson. It was also Willis's wish. Willis's wish? It might be an old-fashioned thought, but we always hoped for a boy to carry on the family line. When a girl was born instead, I was happy about the birth of a granddaughter, but also felt like I failed to fulfill a promise to Willis. Every time I got angry, I couldn't control myself. I'm really sorry. Jamie continued speaking through her tears. Please, Candy, change me. I'll do anything. Jamie said this and then deeply apologized. Jamie, please calm down. Let's talk properly first. No, I've done something terrible. No amount of apologies will ever be enough. Jamie kept apologizing repeatedly. I felt my heart wavering and almost forgave her. That's when Leela spoke up. Don't take her seriously, Candy. Mom always pretends to be deeply remorseful like this when she's cornered just to end criticism against her. Huh. She did the same when Dad found out about her affair. He forgave her because he fell for her act, but her tears dried up immediately afterward. This is probably just an act too, right? You can't fool me. Leela's observation made Jamie falter. What are you saying, Leela? Looking closely, Jamie's tears, which were flowing heavily just a moment ago, had already dried up. It was likely fake crying. Jamie, I can't forgive you anymore. How twisted can you be to try to weasel out of what you've done? Wait a minute, I'm not trying to escape anything. Okay, I understand. But we've already decided to take legal action. As I said that, Jamie's face turned red with anger. Don't joke with me. Why should I be subjected to this by a daughter-in-law like you? How insolent. Just then, the sound of the house key turning was heard. Candy, is Nicola safe? Miles asked. Miles, why are you here? I thought he couldn't come since he was on a business trip. I had only contacted him on WhatsApp. I called him several times in the middle of the night, then he drove straight here. Miles had been driving since 3:00 a.m. and arrived this morning. I didn't know Miles was coming too. Mom, cut it out. I've been hearing about your harassment from Candy, and I've been warning you every time, haven't I? And now you've gone and hit my precious Nicola. I'll never forgive you for this. Miles, even you're blaming me? How cruel, after I raised you and Leela. What are you talking about? You always left us with Aunt to play around. Our memories are filled with the meals Aunt cooked, not you. Mom, just give it up. Besides, I think the doctor already reported it yesterday. Huh. The hospital knows you hit her, so I think it's just a matter of time before the police come. No, wait. You're okay with your mother being arrested. I'd rather not have someone who hits a 3-month-old baby around. No matter what you say, Mom, you have no one on your side now. Jamie finally seemed to understand her situation. Pale-faced and slumped, she waited. Soon, the police arrived and Jamie was arrested. As a first-time offender, she received a suspended sentence, but Miles and Leela cut ties with her and issued restraining orders. Miles moved out of the in-laws' house with me and Nicola and rented an apartment while looking for a place. We stayed briefly with Leela, which was a great help. Candy, I'm really sorry for everything. I'll take parental leave. If I can't get it, I'll change apartments or even jobs to ensure your and Nicola's safety. I was so happy to hear Miles say that. His company had some issues with the working environment and he couldn't get parental leave, so he resigned and found another job. Now he comes home on time, helps with Nicola and the housework. We live in a high-rise near Leela's family, often gathering for meals or enjoying barbecues. I don't know what's become of Jamie, but I heard from neighbors that after her arrest, she's become completely isolated and doesn't go out anymore. Prideful Jamie probably can't bear being known as someone who did such terrible things. Well, it doesn't matter to me anymore. She doesn't know where we moved, so there's no chance of meeting or her showing up unexpectedly. I plan to live happily, supporting each other as a family with Miles, Nicola, and Leela's family. Nice to meet you. The woman who entered the room suddenly greeted me. If I marry this woman, my father's debts will be wiped out, I thought. However, she had a scar on her face, and more importantly, there was my father to consider. Are you really okay with this? When I asked, she fell silent for a while. My name is Chris Baker, 45 years old. I was an only child raised by my father who ran a small-town factory and my timid mother. My dad had a strong streak of independence from a young age and started a metalworking factory in his mid-20s. However, the business never did well, and my parents quarreled almost every night. By the time I entered junior high, I realized their business was on the brink of collapse. It was clear that it would be better to give up. Still, my dad never lost hope and always smiled in front of me. I lived a poor life because of my dad, but seeing him work, I couldn't truly resent him. Eventually, I started helping out in the factory. It turned out that I really was my dad's son. I had a natural talent for precision work. I wanted to work in the same field, but who knew how long the factory would last? With those mixed feelings, I studied at a technical high school and helped at the factory when I got home. I led a life far removed from club activities or romance. In my senior year of high school, I planned to take over my dad's factory. However, my dad strongly opposed this and said, "It's not that easy." He also insisted, "At least get some experience at other companies first." I thought it would be the same since it was the same industry, but he wouldn't budge no matter how much I tried to persuade him. Well, I thought it was my lack of ability back then. Maybe he just didn't want me to go through the same struggles. After a fight with my dad, I left home. I got a job at a steel plant in a neighboring state, working hard every day. My dad's unique way of doing things had rubbed off on me, and I often got scolded by my experienced colleagues. Meanwhile, my dad kept running his business on the edge. He never gave up his old-fashioned quality over quantity mindset and ran the business without thinking about profit. There was even talk of a merger once because of his skills, but he turned that down, saying it would lower the quality. I was so exasperated by his stubbornness that I couldn't say anything. Even so, I had no time to worry about my family. Work consumed me daily, and romance or marriage were far from my mind. My 20s and 30s flew by, and I suddenly found myself in my 40s. Just when I thought I had finally become a full-fledged adult, my parents started to weaken. My dad suddenly collapsed one hot August and passed away in the hospital the following winter. A strain from his hard work must have caught up with him. If he had been checked earlier, there might have been a chance for recovery. My mom blamed herself for not forcing him to go to the hospital. But even if she did, he probably wouldn't have gone no matter what. It was such a sudden farewell that I couldn't even cry. Nevertheless, when I saw the rusty factory at home for the first time in decades, I couldn't stop crying. I would never see my dad standing there again. In the end, I had always been watching his back. I finally realized that after turning 40. Anyway, the factory had to be closed. I wanted to take over and rebuild it, but it wasn't realistic. Just when I decided to carry on my dad's spirit in my own way and move forward out of nowhere, my life took an unexpected turn. It all started with my dad's debt. We discovered that he had racked up several $1,000s of debt, which even my mom didn't realize. The money was borrowed from a factory owner he had known for years, Mr. Adams. Mr. Adams used to play with me a few times when I was a kid. He and my dad frequently visited each other's factories and had quite a close relationship. Mr. Adams switched to mass production early on and quickly flourished. Now his factory is one of the most prominent in town. About a month after my dad's funeral, Mr. Adams called me over. It was surely about the debt. I thought if I paid it back little by little, I might be able to clear it while I'm still alive. Although I didn't know how to apologize, I headed to see him. However, what I heard there was shocking. "We'll take over your father's factory and clear the debt," Mr. Adams declared. I thought it was a joke, but he continued, "In return, I'd like you to marry my daughter." I thought I was dreaming, but he was dead serious. Mr. Adams has only one daughter. She was 32 and single at the time, working in his company's office. She had never been married and had no children. He simply said, "I want her to settle down soon. If I marry her, the debt will be gone. Besides, though our factory will be absorbed, the machinery and skills will be preserved. However, if I refuse the marriage, it all goes away." I was bewildered and bombarded him with questions. "Well, I don't have much experience with relationships," I stammered. I blurted it out before I could even feel embarrassed. "Neither does my daughter." "Just meet her once," he calmly said. That night, I was invited to Mr. Adams' house, waiting in a room for his daughter to arrive. When the door opened, I gasped. She had a large burn scar on her face, with the skin color differing on each side, making it clear that something had happened. I understood why Mr. Adams wanted me to marry her to clear the debt. It was probably hard for her to find marriage prospects because of the scar. What hurt me the most was that she accepted such a terrible arrangement. "My name is Lisa Adams. Nice to meet you." Lisa greeted me politely. She didn't seem to have any intention of opposing her father's wishes. When I couldn't say anything out of confusion, she said, "I've heard the situation from my father. If you're okay with it, I don't mind." She spoke matter-of-factly. She got the scar as a child when she snuck into the factory to play and got burned. From my perspective, the arrangement seemed beneficial. The debt would be cleared, the factory would remain, and I would get married. However, there was no benefit for Lisa. We stared at each other in silence for a while. All I could think about was my dad, who had left me with an impossible situation. Even if I wanted to hate him, I couldn't. Maybe that was the only thing Lisa and I had in common. "Are you really okay with this?" I asked, looking into her eyes. The silence continued, and soon tears welled up in her eyes. Eventually, she started crying like a child and murmured, "I can't accept this." She had been just forcing herself to accept it. "Then let's call this off," I suggested. "I can handle the debt and the factory on my own. I can't drag her into this," I said to myself. However, Lisa stopped me, wiping her tears. "No, I have to do something," she insisted, showing concern for me. I thought harder than I ever had in my life and then came to a conclusion. "Lisa, I have an idea if it's okay with you." I shared my idea with her, and she nodded slightly. I told Mr. Adams, "I would like to marry your daughter, but could we have a bit of a courtship period? We've only just met." That was my answer, and he accepted. I quit my previous job at the steel plant and joined Mr. Adams' company. I also moved into his house as Lisa's fiancé. That meant the debt was, of course, cleared, and our factory was absorbed. I began modifying the techniques my dad had protected for mass production. I worked tirelessly every day. Mr. Adams let me work freely as long as I could make a profit. I continued to study my dad's notes, experimenting and learning. I came to realize how delicate and brilliant my dad's techniques were despite how pathetic he had seemed. When I came home, Lisa would be there waiting with dinner. Sometimes we'd share meals with Mr. Adams and his family, enjoying warm conversations. "I can't wait for the wedding," Mr. Adams would say with a smile, and Lisa and I would smile back. "Are you still up?" Lisa would ask in our shared bedroom. "It's for both of us," I'd reply, continuing my work. "Thank you," she'd whisper. Closing her eyes on my desk, there'd be my work clothes that she had ironed for me. Seeing them always reminded me of my dad and mom. Time flew by, and 3 years passed quickly. One night, we had a rare family dinner with Mr. Adams present. To Chris's incredible achievements, cheers. In those 3 years, I proposed a new production line using my dad's techniques that brought significant profits to the company. If things continued as planned, the debt my dad left would be easily surpassed. "Now I can trust Lisa to you even more. Isn't it about time for the wedding?" Mr. Adams said cheerfully. How wonderful it would be if things could continue like that. However, everything I had done was leading up to that moment. "Mr. Adams, we're not getting married," I said, looking him straight in the eye. Next to me, Lisa had the same look, but her hands were trembling. I felt the same. We had both been lying for the past 3 years. What I had proposed to her at that first meeting was to lie to Mr. Adams about getting married and delay the marriage during the courtship period. During that time, I would make enough profit to cover the debt and carry on my dad's techniques. Once that was achieved, I planned to tell Mr. Adams everything. It was the only way to achieve my goal and give Lisa the freedom to marry whomever she wanted. In those 3 years, I honestly hadn't laid a finger on her. We lived together because of his watchful eyes, but our engagement was just an act. Both of us kept a respectful distance. As expected, Mr. Adams was stunned. Instead of the angry outburst I anticipated, he apologized to her. "I'm sorry for what I've done," he said. Lisa had never defied her father before. Seeing the determined look on her face, he seemed to reflect on his own behavior. He allowed us not to marry. Moreover, he said I could stay at the company or even go independent if I wished. Mr. Adams apologized to her for imposing his ideas on her. "I'm truly sorry. From now on, live freely." Seeing her father apologizing, Lisa started crying. Now she could decide her life on her own terms. Afterward, I decided to stay at the company and continue working as I had. Yet I couldn't stay with the Adams family anymore. That was my last night with Lisa. We kept our usual distance. "Thank you so much." Lisa thanked me politely, just like the first time we met. That time, her expression was bright and relieved. "At first, I thought your proposal was impossible, but you really accomplished everything," she continued. "It's thanks to you, Lisa, but it's not all done yet," I said, facing her and closing the distance a bit. She looked surprised and tensed up. I was determined to fulfill my true final goal. Back then, I hadn't seriously thought about that. However, over the 3 years, that had become my sole desire. "Lisa, will you marry me?" Over those 3 years, I had come to realize her beauty and kindness. Her scar didn't matter at all. I was just supported by her inner strength. When she gained the freedom to choose marriage, I would propose to her. That had become my true goal. She stared at me wide-eyed. Of course, she had the right and the courage to refuse. Nevertheless, I wanted her to choose now that she was free. "If marrying me is really what you want, I'd be happy," I said. When I said that, she nodded. That time, she closed the distance between us a bit. Seeing her tears, my eyes filled up as well. As the unstoppable tears flowed, I remembered my dad with nothing but gratitude. A year later, we got married. I still remember the shocked look on Mr. Adams' face when we told him about our marriage. I still continue working for him now. My dad's techniques are at the forefront of the industry. He's probably smiling shyly in the afterlife. "Are you still up?" Lisa whispered next to me. "I still want to work," I started to say, then added, "Well, let's go to bed," and took her hand. I never thought I'd have a family. Maybe this is the version of me my dad always wanted to see.